fade away. Okay, let's see. Is Andre here by any chance? Andre? Yeah. Okay. What about Venerable Dhammaratna?
Yes, I'm here. Hi. Good morning, Professor.
Let me see. Where are you? Oh, okay, there you go. Okay. Venerable Dylan. That's how you would like to be addressed, correct? Venerable?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we have everyone. And before we get begin, any thoughts, any questions? Especially with regards to what we talked about last week, maybe regarding the readings you've been doing on the side, all of which are really optional, right? Not mandatory.
Professor,
Yes, please.
I
Yeah,
have a
please,
question
by all
not
means.
regarding the contents, but I want to know that the slides you share on the class, can you share it to us through the model?
So meaning that they have not yet been uploaded?
Yeah, I didn't find
Okay, all right.
the
So
slides.
I am going to make a note of it just to remind myself. Give me 1 second.
Okay, thank you.
And for the recording one also, they are not in the module right now.
Okay.
The class recording. Hello, Professor.
Give me 1 second, please.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm back. Um, so I hear you, Venerable. We are just beginning to record the class for the benefit of maybe I forgot which student was it. He most likely would not be here, and therefore would.
Is
Oh, it's probably you, right, Venerable?
yeah.
Okay,
So
I
actually,
see.
the last class video is not uploaded in module.
It's
So
not
how can I get?
uploaded. Okay, okay.
Yes.
I will make a note of it.
Okay.
Alrighty. Okay. Anything else on your mind? Questions you may have? And just to quickly remind you, last week we talked about steps 1 and 2 of the so-called 16-step Anapanasati practice. And the first two steps are distinct from the rest of the steps, at least in the following way. So with regards to steps 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 16, they are prefaced by the expression, he trains in. Okay, meaning the meditator would train in the following. So for example, he trains in developing awareness of the whole body, right? He trains in the pacification or the tranquilization of bodily sankharas, and so on and so forth. But with steps 1 and 2, the preface is such a preface is actually lacking, is actually missing, right? And so traditionally, people interpret that to mean that step 1 and 2 are really a sort of preliminary practice, if you will. They're not part of the formal practice. And this interpretation is further corroborated by the fact that virtually all the anapanasati steps appear in other suttas where breathing is not part of the practice. And so, for example, you might be training in gladdening your mind, but the gladdening of the mind is not taking place in the context of breathing in, the meditator gladdens her mind, right? Breathing out, the meditator gladdens her mind, but simply straightforwardly, the meditator gladdens his or her mind, right? And for that reason, we know that 1 and 2 are kind of secondary practice, or at least just serving as warm up to the formal practice. And then last week, we also mentioned the fact that when we do a comparative study of what the Pali Canon's version of Anapanasati Sutta says with sister suttas found in other sectarian versions, in other sectarian recensions, we get the distinct impression that steps 1 and 2 are not really about calming your breath intentionally as to bring about its becoming shorter, right? So step 1 is about noticing long breath. Step 2 is about noticing short breath. And historically, there are Buddhist traditions that argue that this shows a sort of progression. As you meditate, as your metabolic rate slows down, for example, you'll move from breathing longer breaths to breathing shorter breaths. And in the scheme of things, breathing shorter breath is considered more advanced, meditatively speaking, right? It represents a higher stage of training, so to speak. Now, once again, when we compare um, what the sutta says with the sister suttas, we could see that it's not just the length of the breath that people experiment with, but rather also the rhythm, like how fast, how slow, right? How deep, how shallow the breaths are. That can be part of the practice. And we argue that given the way the Buddha teaches meditation, where meditation is really never about you're developing arbitrary concentration on a single point, right? Like in the entirety of the early Buddhist canon, we never see the Buddha prescribing techniques such as counting the breath, right? Fixing your attention on the breath, like staring at your navel, right? Um, Becoming singularly preoccupied with some physical region, such as the area between your two eyes, and so on and so forth. We never see that. All these familiar techniques, such as counting the breath, reciting mantra, and so forth, they come much later than the time of the early canon. And the early canon, as far as mainstream meditation is concerned, deals exclusively with satipatthana practice, which involves a range of activity. Kind of like, once again, when you're driving a car, you're not singularly focused on your nose tip. You're not singularly focused on, like a spot that is 3 meters ahead of your car, right? But rather, you are engaging dynamically in a range of activity that are all related to driving, such as paying attention to speed limit, whether or not there are pedestrians on the street, how far away you are from the other cars, um, the physical posture in which you're driving, and so on and so forth. Okay. In the same way, when the Buddha teaches by ways of prerequisites or warm-up exercises to meditation, he teaches this kind of satipatthana. He teaches this kind of range of activity. Last week, we talked about speech, right? We talked about how when you are developing satipatthana on the topic of speech, then you will give attention to things like the motive behind your speech, right? The timing, the appropriateness, the effect of your speech. And then using all the aforementioned cues, you may modify the way you speak, right? If I am looking at some of your faces and I realize that, um, so and so are looking confused, then maybe I slow down my talk, right? Maybe I will introduce like a story, an anecdote, analogy, an example to to better illustrate my point, to make sure that more of you are on the page, on the same page, right? So this is a sort of situational awareness that you're developing as opposed to single-pointed attention. And in the same way, too, with regards to breathing long and short, what we're really doing is looking at the effect of the breathing activity. And people who have very little meditation background may ask, what effect? Well, actually, there are so many subtle things we're doing right now that are actively shaping our present moment experience, right? So, for example, some of us might, through years of practice, develop the rather unskillful habit of folding ourselves in this way, right? Kind of like cowering and compressing our chest in a sort of protective gesture. And this may be a result of, I don't know, years of parental abuse, perhaps, right? Years of you're having to fend off a rather hostile environment. But then once you are in the habit of recoiling from the world and compressing your chest and curling yourself into a protective ball, it actually has an effect on your overall sense of being. Chances are you're likely to develop diffidence, right? You're going to be lacking in confidence. And you're going to project yourself in a certain way. People are likely to look at you and unconsciously think of you as a victim, right? People may look at you and unconsciously perceive you as a potential prey if these people we're talking about are predators themselves, right? And so there are many things we do right now, right? The way you use your muscles, the way you speak, the way you breathe, that are sculpting, that are molding, that are shaping, that are creating your overall sense. If you are constantly thinking certain recurring thoughts, these repetitive thoughts will um, take you into depression, for example, or these repetitive thoughts will take you into being very confident, right? Feeling optimistic and so forth. In the same way, too, the breath being an integral part of your overall nervous system, right? It serves as a sort of bridge between voluntary and involuntary activities. Um, it really plays a subtle but palpable role in influencing how you feel. So why don't we do the following exercise? So this is going to be um, really the first experimentation of the technique. What I'm going to ask you to do next is that please feel free to either keep your cameras on, or if you like, you can turn your camera off for the time being. If for whatever reason you don't want people to be staring at you while you are deeply absorbed in meditation, right? And I will provide you with a very straightforward, simple, guided meditation, if you will, explaining along the way uh, how I understand the techniques are to be implemented. Now, a few words about the posture once again. Okay, so um, it's sometimes useful to think of meditation as sometimes involving a more formal approach, sometimes involving a more informal approach. And I don't know, like maybe being a monk, a nun, a regular practitioner of meditation, you have a sort of daily meditation schedule where, for the duration of 1 hour, for a duration 2 hour, maybe for a duration 15 minutes, you would deliberately place yourself in a secluded environment where you could temporarily withdraw yourself away from social interactions right? And this is where you kind of deliberately put aside uh, worries and distractions and things like that, and wholeheartedly um, dedicate yourself to some meditation technique. And in a formal situation like this, a lot of people would prefer to sit in a formal way. Okay, and there are a lot of things you could say about sitting posture and so forth, but I mentioned, to make a long story short, the most important ingredient is probably with regards to how you hold your back straight, right? If you are able to remember the natural curvature in your lower back, and when you're reminded to keep your back straight, I don't mean to be literally straight, right? Like a bamboo, right? Like a iron rod or something like that. But rather, we are really talking about allowing the natural S shape of your back to serve as a kind of cushion. All you have to do is to kind of feel this inwardly curving curvature in your lower back, kind of engage that, and then use that as a natural cushion to support the weight of your body. So that's what really is meant by the expression keeping your back straight. Now, however, for the purpose of this class, and also for the purpose of your own practice, okay, you don't always have to do like a formal type of practice, or to adopt a formal type of sitting style. This could be for various reasons. It could be that you have some kind of debilitating physical condition, right? It's just exceedingly uncomfortable for you to be seated in that particular posture, or in fact, in any posture for extended period of time. And maintaining that kind of posture is just impractical, right? Or it could simply be a matter of personal preference. Everyone is really constituted differently, right? They're of different karmic constitution, so to speak. So it may be the case that for most people, the traditional advice about keeping the back straight is really helpful in maintaining an overall alert mental mode. But you might be among the few exceptions, right? That particular posture is just creating a lot of unnecessary discomfort. It's just creating unnecessary hurdles. Right? In the suttas, there are instances of people who, due to sickness, are lying in bed, and they pretty much practice meditation exclusively in that posture, right? Lying in bed, right? Lying down, and so forth. There are people who are known to have attained very high spiritual attainments by ways of walking, right? By ways of applying meditative technique to sort of context of exercise. Right? That could work too. So if you prefer, uh, for the following exercise to, say, lie down, instead of sitting up, feel free to experiment with it. My advice is, as the semester goes on, you probably want to give yourself a chance to experiment both the informal and the formal approach, and discover for yourself, right, in what proportion they're useful to you. It could very well be the case that, as a result of this experimentation, you completely do away with the formal part, right? Or you completely do away with the informal part, right? Or you may end up doing 50-50, right? 70-30, right? Different kind of allocation. Or you might just improvise as the occasion calls for it. There are times in the day when you feel like this heroic energy is welling up in you, and then you feel like, you know, taking the gung-ho approach and, keeping your back straight and just making yourself ultra alert like that, right? Or you could really just allow your body to do whatever it likes, but then just keep mental alertness. So as long as you have mental alertness, bodily posture, physical posture is of secondary importance. Now, I know that this goes against what the tradition holds to be true, right? People like to think, or people have this ideal picture of the way ancient Buddhists practice, or in fact, the way the Buddha practiced, right? So the Buddha and his first generation disciples must be sitting up, in upright posture 16 hours a day, right? If not more, right? So they give themselves a little time for eating, maybe 4 hours for sleep, maybe 2 hours for sleep. The rest of the time, they're just, locked in this physical posture. Now, personally, I would like to tell you that that is really largely a romanticized picture of things. That's an idealized picture of things. That's really a mythological account of things, right? The more you study early Buddhism, the more you study archaeology, the more you study comparative religion, understanding how the Buddha's contemporaries were meditating, um, the more you're likely to have a more down-to-earth perception of the way meditation is generally done. To give you an example, the Buddha was actually known to take naps in the daytime, right? So this is very different from, people's understanding of, oh, he's just like in the most optimal state in terms of wakefulness, 24 hours a day, right? And he actually took naps, and there are occasions where when his personal attendant Ananda tried to wake him up in the middle of the nap, he would um, say something to the effect, well, I like to rest for a little longer, right? It might be he had traveled a little more for the day, he was just physically weary for the day for whatever reason, right? So on the one hand, there are a lot of immutable um, practices on the part of the Buddha that are very inspiring, that are exemplary, that we could really aspire to repeat, to duplicate, right? On the other hand, it's really good to temper your expectation, to temper your idealized picture of how meditation is to be done. This is really for long-term benefit. The more you make your mind perceive that meditation is a very accessible affair, right? Something that could be relatively easily implemented, the more you're likely to ease into that process and then eventually perhaps learn to enjoy it, right? To turn it into like a very natural thing, a very regular thing in your everyday life. Okay. So you have the option of turning off your camera and lie down, right, if you want, or to sit up, or if you want to keep your camera on, that's totally fine. I won't be staring at your the way you sit or lie down. Any questions about the physical posture part? Concerns? Any? Alrighty. So once again, feel free to, at least for the following session, practice sitting meditation or lying down meditation or standing up meditation.
Uh, so in
Yes,
this
please.
sitting, yeah, in sitting meditation, we just have to focus on our breath.
So I will go through the whole
Oh,
process with you, right? I will go through the whole process with you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, okay.
So right now, just take a little time to take care of your chosen posture. It could be sitting up, it could be standing, it could be lying down on the floor in your bed, and the sofa. And if you choose to sit up, right, depending on your physical condition, you um, might either want to go without any support. So even if you're sitting in a chair with a back support, you might want to seat yourself closer to the edge of the chair so as to not having to lean on the back support, right? But instead to allow, once again, that lower back curvature to support your body weight. Right. Now, on the other hand, if you for whatever reason, personal preference, physical condition, choose to lean on the back of the chair. That's perfectly all right. You're going to, over time, discover the different kind of effects created by different physical postures you adopt. It could be very well be a varying and changing things, meaning that sometimes you would want to use this posture, sometimes you might want to use that posture. And once you've chosen your posture, don't worry that for the duration of, I don't know, maybe next 5 or 10 minutes, you have to be locked into that posture. I understand that traditionally, many people think of Buddhist meditation as always involving entering into a sort of frozen samadhi where you don't move, or you cannot move, or all thoughts disappear, and so on and so forth. Now, that may happen. That may happen, but my advice is not to use that as a goal that you try to go into, right? Don't set that up as your goal, right? But instead, allow yourself to take a dynamic, a more active approach to meditation, at least in the initial part. So this would mean that if you need to adjust your posture, right? Maybe in a major way, maybe after sitting up for a little while, for a few minutes, you go, it's just too uncomfortable, right? And choose to change into standing or lying down. That's okay. Or better yet, if you could somehow withstand whatever discomfort that may come up during the following session, you make your adjustment microscopic. You make your adjustment minor. Okay, this is so that this will not create too much of a disruption to your practice. By minor adjustment, I mean maybe you fidget a little, right? Maybe you slightly adjust how much you're straightening, curving your back. Maybe you're slightly adjusting the way your shoulders are dropped, because you're trying to get a feel of how much your chest is getting compressed. If you allow your shoulders to drop from the front side, chances are, right, you're going to compress your chest. That might seem like a minor thing, but it's just going to make your inner circulation, breath, blood, if you believe in chi and prana and so on and so forth, um, that much less likely to circulate freely, right? So you might want to, when you allow your shoulders to drop, you might want to make sure that they're drop to the sides or slightly, toward the back. This way your chest remains open, right? Now, whatever I say about posture, it's not absolute. There's no one correct answer. You are different. Right? Develop understanding. Be your own teacher. This means that you're feeling your body, you're feeling the effect of your posture. Right? See if this is reasonably comfortable. This is something that you can see yourself potentially settling into for at least the next few minutes. Now, you don't have to think about meditation as going into a frozen state. Right now, all you're doing is just feeling your posture. You're just adjusting. Now, as you're feeling your posture, as you're getting a sense on the effect that this posture has on your overall state, right? See whether or not the present posture is conducive to alertness, meaning that this is not a posture that would somehow undermine compromise your mental alertness. Right? If you realize that the way your chest is being pressed is making you a little mentally obscure, right? Is causing a diminishing in your wakefulness. And maybe you want to adjust your body, maybe animate your body a little bit, right? So this is one of the first things you do to see if at the very least this present posture is not compromising mental alertness. If it is helpful to alertness, that's even better, right? And also look at whether or not your present physical posture is conducive to relaxation. So meaning that you're not sitting in a way or lying down in a way or standing up in a way where you don't feel like you could deeply relax, right? Somehow the posture is getting in the way of your being able to relax more fully, to settle into your sense of body. Once again, you could be dynamic. You could adjust your posture. You're right now experimenting, right? You have a satipatthana topic. The topic is the effect produced by your posture. So you're not frozen. You're not trying to fix your attention to your nose tip. You're just being mindfully aware of the effect of the posture. Is it helpful towards relaxation? You don't have to aim for perfect relaxation. You don't have to aim for perfect alertness, right? That's not what you're aiming for. Just reasonable relaxation. You're comfortable enough that for the next few minutes, this is going to be a sustainable posture. And as you're giving attention to adjusting your posture, feeling the effective posture, now include the breath. So think of the breath as being an integral part, an organic part of your body, right? It's not something separate, but it's part of this quote unquote posture. It's part of this shaping effect. Now, if you have difficulty understanding this, you could use the following perceptions. And by the way, before I do this, let me just explain that Buddhist meditation will gradually tend toward fewer and fewer activities, fewer and fewer exertions. It's going to become a more and more streamlined and simple, straightforward process. But in the beginning, maybe due to necessity, you need to complicate things a little bit, right? So one way you may complicate things, one way to help yourself is by thinking in the following way. Your breath is kind of like the massage motion of a masseuse, someone who is massaging your nervous system. So when you breathe in, you could feel slight expansion of the body. When you breathe out, you feel slight compression, deflation of the body. Right? And just breathe naturally, comfortably. It doesn't have to be of a specific cadence. It doesn't have to be of a specific speed, right? You're experimenting right now, just like you're experimenting with your physical posture. You're experimenting with what is natural breathing, what is comfortable breathing. It's useful to think of the breathing process as massaging motion. It's stimulating your internal organs. It's stimulating the way your blood circulates in your body. It's stimulating your overall nervous system. Now, I know this effect could be very subtle, could be very hard to detect. You might be thinking to yourself, wait, I don't see any effect. This is all very hazy to me. It's okay, don't worry. Okay, just be patient. Be patient. Not if you're not detecting any, effects, so forth, don't worry about it. Just stay with it. Just be patient. Just keep the goal in mind. Keep this satipatthana purpose in mind, which is called mindfulness. Right? What is that goal? Once again, you are feeling the effect of the breath. You're feeling the effect of the body. The breaths are massaging your person. There are different ways of perceiving this. Right? You can think of waves of motion spreading in the body as you breathe in, as you breathe out. You can think of the breaths as the kneading, the pushing motion of the masseuse. The breaths could potentially feel very soothing to the body. Or the breaths can feel energizing to the body, infusing it with energy. Whatever the case might be. Or it's just creating something that it's hard to describe. That's okay. You don't necessarily have to create a label in your mind. You don't need to try to describe it to yourself. You're just relying on your tactile sense to feel what's it like. You may not think that you are actively discovering something. That's okay. Because more frequently than not, the mind learns in a unconscious way, in an intuitive way. But right now, you're allowing the mind to familiarize itself with the effects of sankharas, right? All these activities that are being generated, the way you engage your muscles, the way you relax your muscles, how deeply, how shallowly you breathe, right? How slowly, how quickly you breathe. You're not trying to get into like a frozen state, ultra quiet state. If quietude naturally happens, great. Okay, but you're not trying to control, manipulate, manufacture some arbitrary state. You're just experimenting. You're kind of playing with it. You're experimenting in a very relaxed way, in a very wakeful way. And if the body happens to calm down, if the mind happens to calm down, great. Great. Just as is the case with adjusting your body, you could also adjust your breath, the way you breathe, anytime you like. The breathing, it's a very funny thing. On the one hand, it's intentional. On the other hand, it's not intentional, right? So even when you're deep asleep, breathing happens naturally on its own without your conscious involvement. But then alternatively, you can also consciously breathe. Because the breath is kind of like lying in between the arena of consciousness and the arena of unconsciousness. And you could just subtly intercede, subtly interface. In other words, you don't have to overtly and try really hard to control it, to manipulate it. That's not how we typically breathe. But then on the other hand, you're not doing oblivious breathing either. You're not, like just breathing in like a robot, like automaton. But rather there's some conscious element. There's some voluntary intention involved. You're just surfing this wave, but then subtly you're adjusting your surfboard. You can't really control the waves. You're surfing the wave, but then you can subtly adjust the way you surf, adjust the way you interact with the waves. So if you cannot completely control your breath, that's perfectly natural. In fact, try not to do that, right? You don't need to force your way into the breath. But then on the other hand, try not to become forgetful. Try not to go into a state of oblivion where you lost sight of everything, where you lost sight of the sculpting effect of your intention. I notice how little intention you need to interject to have this very palpable tempering effect, moderating effect, soothing effect, energizing effect on your overall person. You don't have to try very hard. You don't have to control every aspect of things. No. You're respecting the flow. You're understanding the momentum, the flow. You're aware of the way you're involved. Right? This doesn't have to be forceful involvement, controlling involvement. It's a conscious involvement, but then tending towards effortlessness. Alrighty. And so we are going to bring this practice session to an end. Okay, please open your eyes. Right? And you can come back to a sitting posture if you were lying down or standing, right? And I welcome you to turn on your camera once again when you're ready. And let me know, was it very confusing? Okay, or any questions, or if you'd like to share some thoughts about the previous practice session. Anyone would like to say something, or if you have any question about, how
Okay,
this.
can I go first? Can I go first, right?
Yes, please, by all means.
Okay.
Venerable.
So professor and everybody class, to check my feelings about the practice. Just over 50 minutes is okay. So just as guided by the professor, and I'm focused on what the professor just was saying, and just the guidance for me to follow. So of course I just follow my breath, and then I let my breath just flow something like naturally. It means I don't need to control my breath or adjust my breath. Just let my breath naturally just breathe in, breathe out. Now what I do here to focus myself on to be aware of the breath. It means when I breathe in, I'm aware that I'm breathing in. When I'm breathing out, just I'm aware that I'm breathing out. So and then my mind calm down, my body calm down. But I have one problem actually. Just is it likely for me to fall asleep? Just because my mind and
Okay.
my body's calm
Yeah.
down.
Okay.
Yes. Now, sometimes I can
Okay.
come back then. Yeah.
So I understand that in popular contexts, like the way meditation has been greatly popularized in the West, and people
Mm-hmm.
primarily deal with the issue of so-called torpor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sleepiness,
Yeah.
right? Sluggishness, right? Lethargy, and so forth, by ways of adopting some kind of meditation technique, right? Like maybe you'll pull at the top of your ears, maybe you'll breathe a certain way, right? Maybe you'll
Yeah.
visualize luminosity, like brightness in front of you. There are all these different antidotes, right? Antidotal techniques that people adopt to overcome torpor, which are all fine, all of which you can experiment on your own. But then I like to talk about an aspect of torpor that's rarely talked about in the popular context, and that is to the Buddha, um, meditation is kind of like a lifestyle. And so there are all these other even more important factors that are leading to whether you're experiencing lethargy, torpor frequently or on a regular basis, right? Number one, are you properly inspired by the Dharmic teaching? If you're someone who is properly inspired by the Dharmic teaching, you're likely to hold keen interest in meditation, in what you do with the mind, in what the mind is doing, in discovering, what works, what does not work, right? For someone who's properly inspired, you're just fascinated by the teaching. You're fascinated by what you can implement. And you are this eager scientist, right, who is just all perked up, right, who is intrigued. So this is one aspect, right? The other is the way you moderate your energy level on a day-to-day basis, even in a quote unquote non-meditative setting, it absolutely would affect how you meditate. So in many ways, meditation, the formal meditation is an extension of how you live your life. It's an extension of the way you relate to your mind in everyday moments. So if you're someone who is already in the habit of knowing how to interface and enjoy clarity of mind, right? You're someone who knows how to properly tap into this energy reservoir in you, right? You're someone who's in the habit of conserving your energy. There are a lot of people, they waste their energy on completely unnecessary exertions, right? But you're someone who, if you needed to act, you act with precision, right? When you're speaking, you don't waste your energy on idle chatter. You don't waste your energy on non-constructive speech, right? Or you're conserving your energy so you don't engage in things like gossiping and, slandering, distorting the truth, so on and so forth. In your everyday life, you are conserving your energy in a way so that you're enjoying ease a lot of the time with high frequency, right? In life, you're someone who um, don't see the shutting down of wakefulness as an intrinsically enjoyable thing, but rather you enjoy all sorts of good qualities that wakefulness can bring, right? Whether or not you have a healthily, robustly developed sense of self, self-esteem, it affects your energy level. All these things, okay? And so I would argue that what I just said play a more important role in whether or not when you find yourself relaxed, when you find yourself not having, like busy things to become preoccupied with, you're still in a wakeful, alert, and refreshing state. Okay. Now, on the other hand, let's say you go, um, wow, I needed to completely shape up my life in order to ward off a torpor in meditation. It's just too hard. right? It's just really not practical. And then in such a case, I have the following advice for you. So, number one, um, learn to differentiate between tiredness, sleepiness, and boredom, indifference, torpor. Those are two very different categories of things. Right? So it could be that being like a regular householder, you just you lead a stressful life. In fact, being a monastic, it could potentially be that you're leading an even more stressful life than lay people. All right, that's a distinct possibility, right? And whenever you are able to find a quiet moment to settle down, then you're slipping into sleep. Okay. Then, hey, if you could afford it, maybe taking a short nap is not such a bad thing, right? It's so long that you wake up feeling refreshed and then ready to give it another go at experimenting with meditation. It's not such a bad thing, right? On the other hand, if every single time you try to meditate and you slip into this dullness, right? It may not just be due to fatigue. It may not just be due to, your body trying to take advantage of like a leisurely moment, right? Going into like a deeply resting mode. And then it could be a matter of boredom. It could be a matter of, real lethargy. It could be that you have not galvanized sufficient interest in meditation practice. You may not, say, for example, know clearly what the heck you're doing, right? You're just going through the motion. You know, hey, I'm a monk. I'm supposed to be sitting in a certain way, right? You don't really appreciate what the practice is about because the more you know about it, the more you truly understand its benefit, its purpose, and so forth, the more you're likely to feel like you're energized. You're, like you you're moralized, right? You have this very high morale going into the practice, right? You're very interested in finding out what your mind is like to discover the nature of experience, and so forth. Yeah. And alternatively, you could always fall back to the traditional antidotes, right? Um, Taking a pause to take a cold shower, right? Getting up and walk briskly for a short time, yeah. Yeah. But my suggestion is instead of just relying on these antidotal techniques, work on the root issues. Any other thoughts, questions? All righty.
Uh,
So, yes, please.
so I
Go ahead,
find
Matthew.
myself very imaginative and visual.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
um, when you say waves
yeah, yeah,
over,
yeah,
it kind of disturbs my mind a little bit because I'm
yeah,
thinking of something rough and
yeah,
heavy instead of calm.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
My mind shifts completely from my breathing, from my posture, and I'm
yeah,
thinking about the beach.
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay,
So
that's a very great question. That's a great question. I'm so happy you raised it. Okay, so we might have this ideal about meditation that it is all about you're going into a state where all thoughts drop off, right? And you become unwaveringly focused on the chosen topic. There's nothing else going on, nothing extraneous going on. Okay. That can potentially happen, but um, it's not something that most people could readily repeat or duplicate. So the Buddha, the way he teaches meditation is he relies on the use of perception a lot. Perception is whatever processing filter you bring to your experience, the way you interpret it, the way you explain it to yourself, the way you visualize something, the way you impose borders on things, boundaries on things, and so on and so forth. Uh, that's called perception. Now, eventually, as we meditate, we want to come to see that even perception is a kind of fabrication, it involves mental exertion, right? It involves the use of intention. So eventually we're going to try to pacify that, to transcend over it, to not overly lean on it, right? To reduce the exertion behind such an activity, and so on and so forth. Okay, so eventually. But in the beginning, it's oftentimes a necessary tool. So this is called using thought to counter thought, right? Using perception to counter perception, right? Using conceit to overcome conceit, using desire to rise above desire, right? This is a recurring theme in the Buddhist teaching. Or you take what is generally regarded as a poison, right? A milder version, a more innocuous version of the poison to counter a more lethal type of poison. And that's a role of perception. So as you experiment with the use of different kind of perceptions, you may find some perceptions are useful for you for the present purpose. Some are not so much. In fact, some are detracting or even harmful to your present purpose. Right? So if by picturing the breath energy as waves is um, creating more disturbance, right, then you take the liberty to drop that, to put that aside, right? To change an approach, to adopt a different technique, right? To use a different perception, and so forth. Yeah, there's really hardly anything dogmatic about Buddhist meditation. You are cultivating yourself to become an increasingly more trustworthy island. You're cultivating yourself to become an increasingly trustworthy spiritual friend or teacher inside you, right? So whatever we learn from outside voices and so forth, and we maybe if we choose to do so, we internalize part of that voice. It becomes an instruction that we can repeat to ourselves. This in Buddhist terminology is called vitaka, right? Apply thought, a thought pertaining to the retention of teaching. Okay. So that could be useful. But then eventually you might develop your own inner voice. Eventually you will, um, as a result of developing greater affinity with how the mind works, you are in the best position to guide yourself, to come up with a meditation program, to design a meditation program for yourself than anyone else. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, if not, we're going to move into the next phase of today's course, which is about the third step. Okay, now, but before we talk about third and the fourth step, once again, I need to give you a little lecture. Okay, I need to explain to you how exactly these steps work. The so-called mechanism, the working mechanism behind the first tetrad. The first tetrad, as you may recall, is traditionally classified as the body-based or bodily-based satipatthana. It's about the body, right? There are the four different kinds of satipatthanas. There's the body-related satipatthana, there's a feeling-related, there's a mind-related, and then there is something called the Dhamma or the Dharma-related satipatthana. The first group is about the body. Okay, and when you look at steps 3 and 4, what are they? They are, step number 3, breathing in, you develop awareness or sensitivity about the whole body. Breathing out, you develop awareness or you become sensitive to the whole body. Step number 4, which is kind of building on step number 3, pacify, tranquilize bodily sankharas while you're breathing in. Pacify, tranquilize bodily sankharas as you're breathing out. Okay. So what are these about? Long story short, step number 3 is there to help you do step number 4. Okay. So previously we talked about how when you look at the 16 steps, they are not sequential. When I say that, I mean between the tetrads, right? It's not the case that, oh, you need to first practice the first 4 steps in order to practice the next 4, right? Or that the last 4 somehow represent the highest in the Satipatthana or Anapanasati training. That's not the case at all. However, within each one of the tetrads, right, they are sequential. So 3 does help with number 4. Okay. And 5, 6, 7 do help number 8. Okay. 9, 10, 11, they're designed to help 12. Okay. 13, 14, 15, they're designed to help 16. So in the same way, 3 and 4 are sequential. 3, being aware of the whole body, it's there to help you do step number 4, which is tranquilizing bodily sankharas. A few questions will arise. Now, when people look at step number 3, developing awareness of the whole body. Now, as I mentioned last week, in Theravada Buddhism, the so-called commentarial tradition has become so influential as to eclipse the suttas themselves, meaning that people oftentimes use the interpretation offered by the commentaries so much, right, that they really replaced or supplanted what the suttas actually are saying about the practice. In this case, in the commentarial tradition, which once again is virtually all influential, I would argue that the great majority of Theravada Buddhist traditions today, they will understand step number 3 in the following way. They will tell you awareness of the whole body. Here, the body doesn't refer to your physical body. The body refers to your breath. The body refers to the entire duration of your breath. So, in other words, if you're able to give your attention to the beginning of the breath, right, say inhalation, the middle part of inhalation, the ending part of inhalation, if you're able to give attention to the beginning part of exhalation, middle part of it, the ending part exhalation, then you are being aware of the whole body. Okay. Now, we know this is not a reliable interpretation. This is not a correct interpretation of step number 3. Step number 3 really is literally about the physical body, not the breath body, not the duration of the breath. Okay, how do we know? Well, there's so many indications. Number 1, there are a number of suttas where um, we have explicit instruction on covering your body head to toe with your awareness as you would with a white cloth covering the whole body. Okay, we have expressions such as that, right? And then also that when you look at the other suttas or suttas other than this Anapanasati Sutta, you will see that the so-called bodily based satipatthana can be done in a way that does away with breathing altogether. We mentioned this, right? No breath is mentioned whatsoever, right? The Buddha directly delves into what to do with the body. Okay. So therefore, developing awareness of the whole body really is about developing awareness of your physical body, of your kaya. Okay. Now, step number 4, tranquilizing or pacifying bodily sankharas. Once again, what are sankharas? Anyone recall the way we explain sankharas? What are they? Anyone happen to remember? This is one of arguably the most important terminology in Buddhism, right? Well, at least for our purpose, it's very useful to think of sankharas as exertion, as activities. Just to quickly remind you, rounds of rebirth and nibbana, they're explained in terms of sankhara in early Buddhism. So what is the rounds of rebirth? What is samsara? When there are sankharas. Meaning, for as long as your mind is driven by thirst and it is trying to become something, it is trying to depend on something, it's trying to own something, it's trying to be someone, it is trying to get to some place, it is trying to extract some happiness, pleasure from an experience, right? And so on and so forth. All those activities are called sankharas. What is Nibbana? Nibbana is a resolution of sankhara. It's the complete pacification of sankhara, meaning your mind is no longer driven by thirst and therefore no longer engages in, revels in, delights in all these activities of asserting itself, creating a self, right? Becoming, turning itself into a doer and turning itself into an owner, and so on and so forth, right? The so-called I-making, mind-making processes, they come to cessation completely. That's called resolution of sankharas. Okay. Now, what about body sankharas? There are activities about the body, or activities done toward the body, or activities generated by the body. That's called body sankharas. Okay. Now, here's another question. This is a deeper one. Let me know if you're not following. Okay. Remember, I said last week, each one of the four tetrads are self-sufficient, self-contained systems, right? Meaning that all you have to do is practice step number 3 and 4, and potentially, theoretically, you can end all your suffering. You can attain the highest fruition in early Buddhism, right? But why is that? Isn't Buddhism about much more things? Isn't Buddhism about teaching the no self? Isn't Buddhism about practicing impurity, contemplation? Isn't Buddhism about, going to first jhana, second jhana? Isn't Buddhism about formless attainments? All those wonderful and abstract things. And how is it the case that just by pacifying bodily sankharas, you can become an arahant? Isn't it strange? How does it work? How does it work? Okay, well, here's one way to explain it. When it comes down to it, there are two fundamental mental defilements we're trying to eradicate as a meditator. The first one is called sensuality. When you eradicated this, you're called a non-returner. You're called a third fruition winner. Okay, this is a very high level awakening, if you will, right? So sensuality is one. Number 2 is conceit, the asmimana, the I am conceit. When this one is eradicated, a person is said to have attained the highest religious goal in early Buddhism, arahahood, right? You've ended any kind of mental suffering. Now, sensuality, what is that exactly? What kind of mental defilement is this? Let me give you some examples. Right now, as you're listening to my talk, there's part of you that may not be very comfortable. Like, this is kind of boring. I have no idea what the heck he's talking about, right? And then there's a part of you that's kind of like itching and agitating and raring to go somewhere else. And then you're looking at this mental picture, right? There's this, I don't know, like this frozen yogurt place that's down the street. And you're like, oh, I want to go there. I want to be there. I remember the taste, a tingling, tart sensation on my tongue. Ooh, just the thought of it makes me salivate, right? So when your mind is raring to be somewhere else at it in a different sensory scenario, right? Either you're missing about some past sensory experience, or you're looking forward towards some sensory experience. That's called sensuality. It's a huge cause of um, agitation, restlessness, lack of peace in the mind. The mind wanting to be somewhere else, right? Reminiscing, feeling nostalgic for a sensory scenario, right? Oh, every time I remember my first date, right? My first relationship, romantic relationship. Oh, I'm filled with this warm feeling, right? With this bittersweet feeling, right? Oh, if I could go back, right, to the time, right? If I could revisit the experience. Oh, if only I could have that again in the future or make that experience even better in the future, right? That kind of nostalgia, that kind of longing is called sensuality. Okay. Now, in the commentarial tradition, sensuality comes to mean something else. It comes to mean that you have sensory experience. You're able to see, you're able to hear. And when you go into jhana, you need to shut off all the sensory operations. That's not what sensuality means. Sensuality, per the sutta's definition, is your mind's obsession about, passion for sensory experience. That's called sensuality. Okay. Now, how does step number four deal with sensuality? How can practicing step number four, which is tranquilizing bodily action, lead to your mind becoming free from sensuality? Now, the Buddha actually taught many different ways to rise above, to transcend over sensuality, to wean the mind off of its habit, its addiction to sensuality. But here is one among many techniques that the Buddha taught. The Buddha understands mental defilements such as sensuality not as a single independent phenomena, but rather as a phenomena that is built on many conditions, right? Dependent origination. Okay. So for sensuality to happen, there has to be some requisite conditions present. For example, number one, your imagination is running amok, perception. And in other words, in order for you to go, oh, if only I could be there, right? If only I can have that. What happens to your perception then? There is a mental scenario, right? And that's really active. And that mental scenario, to use the Buddha's analogy, is kind of like the mirage at the horizon. The mirage is beckoning out to you. All right, you're a desert traveler, and you see this mirage, a oasis, like a lake, a body of water, right, in the distance. And this beautiful, this alluring picture is beckoning out at you. It's beckoning out at you. Come towards me. Right? This is an analogy frequently used in the early suttas. Right? Another analogy is the way we enter into dreams, the way we enter into dreams when we go to sleep, right? And gradually you shut off, you're disconnected, your connection with external sensory input, right? Your eyes are not looking at external environment. You're not really registering outside sound and so forth, at least not actively processing outside sound, right? And then in the seeming vacuum, there arises some fleeting images. Now, some of these images will just arise and pass away. They'll do very little to your mind. But occasionally an image pops up and it captures your attention. It's something alluring, right? Maybe it's a beautiful human being that goes, come, come to me, right? And then there's a part of your mind, because it's still infested with sensuality. So it goes, whew, let me go there. You interacted with this image. You're captivated by this image. Then what happens? Then your mind proliferates. It creates even more story. It creates even more movie, and you go into a dream. So in Buddhist psychology, this is how you enter into a dream, right? And this is very similar to the way you enter into daydream. This is almost identical. The way you enter into daydream. This is almost identical to the way you enter into sensuality. So perception plays a role in sensuality. What else plays a role? Feeling. Feeling plays a role. Okay, so this is a little anecdote in the early suttas, right? There's someone who, due to an experience of lust, this is someone who was just recently ordained, right? There's someone who just recently became a monk, right? And he was infested with lust. It's, oh, I want to disrobe. I want to return to lay life, right? And he was struggling. And he went to Ananda, the Buddha's personal attendant, one of the Buddha's foremost disciples, right? He went to Ananda to look for help. What did Ananda tell him? The Ananda teaches him to deconstruct the lust into two components. There's perception and there's feeling. Right? Now, either you work with these two simultaneously or you single one out and focus on that one. Then you could rise above lust. You can diffuse the lust, if you will. So perception, with regards to perception, what can you do about perception? You can change that perception. You can also change the way you relate to that perception. Say, for example, how much attention you're giving to the perception, right? How much you're being pulled into by that perception, how much you're allowing your mind to get captivated, to get intrigued by the perception, right? How firmly you're clinging or holding onto this perception. All these things you can work on by changing the content of that perception, right? So this is one way. The other way is to focus on your feeling, on your feeling. Why do we experience lust? Why do we experience sensual thirst, sensual hunger? It is because your body is experiencing a feeling of lack. What do you do about a feeling of lack, a feeling of hunger? If you learn to imbue your body with a sense of contentment, with a sense of fullness, with a sense of non-hunger, okay, you feel complete here, then your attention would not lash out and in desperate search for food out there. And the way to do that is by ways of creating a sense of ease, a sense of contentment in your body, and preserving them, preserving that ease wherever you go. Now, as soon as there's interruption in your sense of ease, you're what? You're opening up a window in which the mind is itching, is raring to go. The mind is like, it's not so comfortable here. This present moment sucks, right? I'm not content here in the present moment. I'm looking elsewhere. That's the way sensuality works. So if you, the reason your mind is not right here, is not in the present moment, right? It's because it doesn't have anything good in the present moment. A meditator may try to control this, may try to beat down the mind and go, you stay right here. You stay right here. Don't you dare go anywhere. You may take that approach, that forceful approach, that militaristic, that controlling approach. But it's not a very good approach. In fact, oftentimes it's completely ineffective, right? Oftentimes it backfires. This technique will backfire on you. The mind will rebel even more when you try to control it, when you try to beat it down, when you try to suppress the desire in such a way. Okay. So that kind of approach is really a last-ditch effort. It's your last resort, right? It's only when you're really desperate, right, you go for it. The Buddha always recommend an approach that is subtler, that is more skillful, that involves less coarse sankharas, if any at all. Okay. So what do you
Also,
do?
yeah,
Yes, please.
what is a practical approach to that? Like for instance, if I usually eat rice
Yeah,
and that gives me a sense of satisfaction,
sure.
pleasure when I
That's
eat
right.
rice
That's
with
right.
my meals and
Good
whatever
question.
I eat my
That's right.
rice with, but
That's right.
now eating bread or noodles instead.
That's right. That's
And
right.
and no matter how much bread, slices of bread, or how much noodles I eat, I am
That's right.
full, but my
That's
body doesn't
great.
satisfied and I
Yep.
crave for that
Yep.
rice.
Yep. That,
And
yep.
it causes me to like I want to go seek that rice out,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I don't feel satisfied, and I'm full, but I'm still hungry.
Right. That's a great question, Andre. So here's the thing. The mind, when it's looking for pleasure, when it's looking for happiness, it's implicitly, unconsciously, always performing the following calculus. What is the easiest to get? What is the maximum, the most satisfying I can get? What is the least distance I have to travel to get? It's performing this kind of calculus. Okay. Now, once this calculus is in place, I don't care how much doctrine, dogma you instill in your mind, how moral you think you are, right? What a good Buddhist or what a good Christian, whatever the case might be, right? You're not going to um, wrestle successfully with the mind's natural tendency. So when the Buddha teaches about ways to free yourself from sensuality, he takes into account this calculus. What is easiest? What is closest to you? What will give you what is most sustainable? What is the greatest amount of satisfaction and so forth. Now, when your mind has no choice, right? It sees no other alternative. And it goes, ah, entering into a daydream. Right now, this lecture is really boring to my mind. Okay, I need to switch off. I don't like to listen to this guy talking. All right. And the only alternative it's got is by creating this daydream, this mental script, this mental movie. All right. Oh, okay. This is giving me more satisfaction than the lecture. And your mind will go in there. Okay. Now, in Buddhism, just as is the case with most contemplative traditions, sensuality is described as being external. External. What does that mean? Yes, it means outside. Okay, yes, okay. You're chasing things outside. You're looking for music outside. You're looking for beautiful sight outside. You're looking for touches, tactile sensations outside. Yes, okay. But there's a deeper meaning than something being outside. It requires your attention to travel elsewhere, to travel a farther distance to land on this target than what is immediately present. I don't know if that makes sense, but there is an immediately present ease, contentment. That's kind of like veiled, that we are blind about, right? We have not discovered, for example, right? And so the mind misperceives these external things to be what is the easiest begotten, what can be most easily procured for its own satisfaction. It's a mistaken notion. So how do we correct this mistaken notion? You use the word practical, right? One way is to cultivate the sense of relaxation, to cultivate the sense of ease, to cultivate the sense of contentment. And then you're also working on the sankharas to relate to all these things. How do you change the way you relate to inner contentment? The Buddha doesn't just tell you to be content. Once you start feeling contentment, some small measure, modest measure of contentment in you, what the Buddha teaches next is absolutely brilliant. Okay, this could be found in a number of suttas, such as, I don't know if the number, it's in Anguttara Nikaya, for example, where the Buddha says, once you begin to see the benefit of it, you need to learn to recognize it even faster, even better. You need to develop confidence for it. Wow, this is contentment. This is great. Wow, you need to sensitize your mind to it so your mind can recognize, wow, it's so easy to get, and its effect can be so pervasive, and what if I were to slow down and to savor it more wholeheartedly? And then you started to learn that, this kind of contentment, this kind of ease, is even more gratifying than sensory stimulation. There are all these things you can do to change the way you relate to an experience. So, in other words, it's not just about changing sensuality experience with something else. It's also about once that change has taken place, you work on the sankharas. So you relate to this new experience in a different way. You learn to bask in it. Let me give you a more relatable experience. Um, you are trying jacuzzi for the first time. Okay, it's cold out there. Okay, and you're trying jacuzzi for the first time, and um, you never had jacuzzi before, and so you're a little apprehensive. So initially, you just dip your toe into a jacuzzi and go, "Ooh, this feels kind of good." Right? It's all hot and bubbly and so forth, right? Now, what if I were to dip my foot? What if I were to dip my legs? What if I were to sit in the jacuzzi, right? All the way where the water reaches my neck, right? And now I am fully immersed in jacuzzi. In early Buddhist training, there are a lot of similar sankharas. When you begin to discover a wholesome pleasure, you don't just, oh, discover it and watch it and be observed, like just observe it. You don't do that. You learn to immerse yourself in it. You learn to bask yourself in it. You learn to experience it using a different mindset, right? With greater contentment, for example. Okay. Then what happens? That whole experience changes as a result. What started out as modest, what started out as unfamiliar, you will develop confidence over time. You'll develop appreciation for it over time. You'll learn to enjoy it better over time. It will become more and more pervasive and gratifying over time. Now, all that I said here to some people may be very perplexing, maybe very hard to understand. What? Enjoying it more? I thought Buddhism is not about enjoyment. I thought Buddhism is about letting go and enjoyment. Yes, in the end, in the end, in the end, when the mind is quenched of its thirst, craving, right? There's no longer any issue about enjoying. There's just perfect peace. You don't need to be a person to enjoy something anymore. But in the process of training, the Buddha is very big on enjoyment. In numerous suttas, the Buddha said, with regards to the pleasure that accords with the Dhamma, right, the right kind of pleasure, what should you do? Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it, develop it, all right, bask yourself in it. So to make it more developed, make it more pervasive, right? So that this good pleasure, this new kind of pleasure will feed your mind well and becomes a superior substitute to sensuality. There is this very famous sutta involving Mahanama, a lay disciple of the Buddha, right? He said to the Buddha, look, teacher, Bhante, I've learned from you for so long, and I already clearly understand. Five aggregates are impermanent. They're dukkhic. They're not self, right? I already understand those things. But every time I'm surrounded by beautiful women, by alluring music, my mind still wavers. What happens? Why? How did the Buddha answer him? The Buddha said, because you don't have jhana. You don't have the superior happiness. You don't have the pleasant abiding here and now. You don't have a way to feed your mind well. And so the mind is still itching for sensual pleasure. You see. So what does that have to do with step number 4? Pacifying bodily sankhara so that the body doesn't experience the sensation of agitation or lack. Instead, a sense of ease is preserved, and you learn to feed on the experience of relaxation. the experience of completion, the experience of non-exertion, and so forth. And naturally, sensuality will weaken and disappear. This is why, in many suttas, the first instruction the Buddha taught to novices, to people who have just newly ordained, right, is protect your physical ease wherever you are. This is a way to protect your monastic status. Because if you don't protect a sense of ease, wherever you are, and your body is agitated, is tense, is coming down the sense of lack, you're going to experience lust easily. Lust is going to arise in healthy, young adults. Questions about that before we take a break? Alrighty, so we're going to take a break and we will be back at let's say 10:50. Okay,
Okay.
see you later. Okay, welcome back. Questions or comments about what we just said? The
Yeah,
connection between bodily sankharas and sensuality and or any other things? Yes.
Professor.
Yes, please, Shati.
I have a question. Just you mentioned that there's an anecdote that a person who asked the Buddha that he might feel the mind when he sees a beautiful woman or things like that, and you said that the Buddha replied that he's he does not have the prajna or things like that. Can you explain it a lit
Uh,
a little
I,
a
I
little more?
didn't catch the latter part of the question.
Uh, you just mentioned that the Buddha replied to this guy that he did not have prajna. What is
Jhana,
Buddha's, yeah,
jhana,
ja,
jhana, right.
jhana,
So,
jhana.
right, or dhyana. In Chinese is translated as 禅, 禅那,
Ah,
right?
okay,
禅宗的禅, right?
okay,
So
okay.
禅那 is in the commentarial tradition understood to be a sort of meditative absorption achieved via um, singular focus, right? It's a result of highly specialized attentiveness, right? Single pointedness and so forth. But in the suttas, jhanas are never described in such a way. Even the expression chitta ekagata, one pointedness, really is not about one pointedness, which we will see later on in the course. But suffice it to say that jhana in the suttas is more a function of renunciation, is more a function of dispassion, is more a function of peace, is more a function of ease than it is about concentration. Yeah. And the jhanas traditionally are um, described as having four stages, right? There's so-called first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, and fourth jhana. Right? Each one supposedly higher than the other. And this is like an important part of the overall scheme of the so-called gradual pacification of sankharas. Yeah.
Is that 一禅、二禅、三禅、四禅? Is that
初禅, 二禅,
初禅?
三禅, 四禅, right? Exactly. Right. And if you look at the way these jhanas are defined in the suttas, what is first jhana called? First jhana is called pleasure born from seclusion, right? 嗯，离生喜乐定, right?
Okay.
So it's not a result of, oh, you're focusing at your nose tip, right? You're becoming absorbed into light or anything like that. But it's the the refreshingness, the ease, the satisfaction that comes from you're secluding yourself from sensuality in a very skillful way, right? And what is second jhana called? Right? Pleasure born from steadiness, from pacification, right? 定生喜乐, right? Pacifying what? Vitaka vichara, inner commentaries, inner dialogues, and so forth. Yeah. What is third jhana called? 离喜妙乐定, right? Pleasure born from um, you're having secluded from happiness, meaning that your mind is no longer feeding off of happiness primarily, but rather it is being satisfied by pleasure. Right? And then finally, the fourth jhana is called pleasure born from equanimity, born from the purification of equanimity, mindfulness, right? 舍念清净, right? None
Okay.
of which is about concentration. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that is because of the lack of enough samadhi, or the samadhi level is not so high, so that guy would have that reaction.
Well, when you put it like that, it sounded like, oh, you don't have enough samadhi, so you lack willpower, and so you are distracted by sensuality. But actually, it's more about that. Where are you right now? Is your abiding here and now a pleasant one, a satisfying one? If it is, then the mind naturally settles down. The mind becomes well fed, so to speak. So if you keep a child malnourished, right, and then the child, out of desperation and when there's no better alternatives, is looking for junk food and is tempted by junk food everywhere. On the other hand, if a child is well nourished, right, and he's got all these delicious and healthy food, then, he would not be rearing, itching at the sight of, say, a candy store.
Okay.
That's really the idea. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And in the Buddha's analysis, yes, there are all these conditions that build up to mental defilement. There are all these conditions that build up to sensuality, but you don't necessarily have to unravel all those conditions simultaneously in one fell swoop. You don't have to do that. Mental defilements are kind of like house of cards, 纸牌屋, right? So you don't need to take down every single piece of the card in order to take apart that edifice, that structure. You just have to knock down a couple, maybe one, that is crucially situated, right? By knocking down just one piece of the card, the whole structure tumbles down. So that's the idea. Yeah. And the best practice approach is oftentimes a pared down one. It's one that is really focused on the key issues. This, this is what the Buddha refers to, like using your attention frugally, right? Using appropriate attention, just give your attention to the absolutely crucial issues, like the handful of leaves, as opposed to the leaves found in the entire forest. You don't have to do that, right? Learn to use your attention strategically, sparingly, frugally, selectively, and then as a result, which you will be able to practice easily. You don't have to do a lot to unravel or to eradicate mental defilements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Anything else? Other thoughts, other questions before we move on? Okay. So why don't we do another practice session? Okay. Specifically about steps 3 and 4. Okay, so once again, feel free to keep your camera on or turn it off if you prefer. If you'd like to try like a more formal approach, informal approach. If you choose to take the more formal approach, then the general advice is about keeping your spine upright. As soon as you know, as soon as you do that, as you straighten your body up, it's likely you will immediately notice how that conduces to an overall sense of alertness. At the same time, you also want to use your common sense, right? Don't overwork your body. Don't overexert your body. Now, allow your posture to be a part of the larger harmonious sense of the body. Soothing, reasonably comfortable, in which you could easily relax. It's generally a good idea to deliberately relax as you go into meditative practice. The typical initial instruction the suttas have for going into meditation is to put aside worries and hankering in relation to the world. 远离世间贪忧. Usually our minds are completely consumed by, driven by, motivated by worries and hankering. Hankering means something like thirst, right? You're greedy for something. You're looking forward to have something for a certain outcome of your action and so forth. So make a conscious effort to take a vacation from those consuming thoughts. Right? If indeed you are dealing with very pressing matters in life, right, things that really demand a lot of your attention, gently remind yourself that at least for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to take a short break. Put aside those worrying thoughts, those hankering thoughts. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to kill all your thoughts at once, right? It may be very hard to do so, especially in the beginning. You want to allow samadhi to naturally happen. So the instruction here is not to put aside all thoughts. The instruction is just to put aside worrying thoughts and hankering thoughts. If you have to think about something, think about this topic, being aware of the whole body. In fact, if you'd like to repeat this instruction, by all means do so to yourself. Speak to yourself in your mind. Breathing in, I'm aware of the whole body. Breathing out, I'm aware of my whole body. And if this basic thought generates some of the thoughts, okay, don't worry about them for now. Okay, as long as they're about this particular topic, then you don't need to stamp them out at once. Now take a short moment to get some sensations of the body. For example, the way your buttocks are in contact with a cushion, the way your back is in contact with the sofa, or the bed, or the floor. And notice how that tactile sensation brings you immediately to the present moment. Right? There's this concreteness, there's this realness, there is this groundedness. Something about the present moment sensation when you give attention to it kind of grounds your mind. It anchors your mind somewhat. So your mind doesn't drift into something abstract, doesn't drift into something distracted. Take a moment to notice the way your clothes feel on your skin. Even if you're laying still, even if you're sitting still, if you're standing still, you could still maybe kind of feel the friction created by the clothing items rubbing against your skin subtly. What does it feel like to have a body? To think that you have a body? What does it feel like? Okay. By the way, you don't have to answer this. You don't even have to answer this in your mind. This is more like a probing question, right? We're not expecting any sort of concluding remarks. This is just a question framed as to help you better explore. What does it feel like to be occupying space, to have weight. We don't care how light, how heavy you weigh, right? But you register weight. What does it feel like? What's the sensation like? Take a moment to feel the border, the boundary of your body. How do you know that's a border? How do you know that's a boundary? The way your skin comes into contact with air, with breeze. Now your mind is roaming, right? As long as roaming or revolving around the right topic, don't worry too much about the fact that it's roaming. Okay, remember Satipatthana, at least initially, is about range of activity. The following analogy might help. You're taking your kid to a local park to play. Then you tell your kid, stay in the park, don't wander off, don't walk into the street, right? Stay in the park. For as long as you're staying in the park, you could play whatever equipment there is. You could, you know, um, play with the slide, you could play with the swing, you could play in the sandbox, you could play with other kids. As long as you stay in the park, you could do all these things. Right? In the same way, as long as you're exploring what the body feels like, allow your attention to kind of like freely roam. If sometimes you're feeling like, oh, this is what it feels like to have a head, right? So be it. And maybe your attention will stay there for 3 seconds, will stay there for 10 seconds. And then you notice, this is what it feels like to be seated, to be in this posture, to be lying down, to be laying on the floor, right? This is what it feels like to be in this posture. Now, once you get a hang of it, while you're practicing this on your own, this may take a longer time, this may take a shorter time to keep you like somewhat anchored, like tethered to the realm of sensation. Then you could do a little more in-depth exploration. Here's one way, among many other ways, to explore your body with greater details in a little more in-depth fashion. The Buddha talks about the body in terms of the so-called four primordial elements. Let's first explore the earth element. What is the earth element? The body has a weight. It is obstruction. It is obstructed, meaning that it takes up space. It will hinder other things. Explore this. Explore just the sensation part. If you absolutely have to visualize your body, if you're picturing your body, okay, so be it. But if you can, try to let that go. Try not to give attention to mental picture, but instead bask yourself wholeheartedly in the sensations. Think of yourself as a sort of a blind swordsman, or like the daredevil character in the uh, Marvel universe. You're not relying on your sight. You're not relying on the faculty of mental picturing. You're using your sense of touch to explore your body. The body is like earth. It has weight. There's a certain heaviness you could feel. If you could help it, don't dwell on the abstract concept of heaviness. Rather, feel it directly. Explore that through the tactile sense. You might be exploring the sense of heaviness or weightiness in the upper part of the body, in the lower part of the body, inside your body, at the skin level, whatever. As long as the child stays in the park, allow it to kind of explore, to roam. You're not trying to force it to become locked down, to become frozen. If your mind gradually calms down, great. Let that be a natural process. If you like, you could explore this sense of weightiness or heaviness in some particular regions of the body. Or you could just feel all of your body at once. It's like when people ask you, how are you? How's it been? Right? And you have this general scan of your person. Yeah, I'm fine. Right? And you're kind of like doing this general scan of the weightiness, of the heaviness, of the earthiness of the body. There's no absolutely right way to do this. I mean, as long as your mindfulness is there, or you remember what you're doing, you're here to explore the body. You're here to develop awareness of the whole body. You're trying to become more sensitive about it. There's no specific picture you're trying to capture. There's no specific sensation you're trying to create. For as long as you stay in this way, you are developing affinity with the body. Your mind is developing intuitive understanding of the body. So don't worry about, at the conscious level, if you're generating the right answer or not. Now, what about the fire element? The fire element is about the temperature of the body. You'd be able to experience your body as consisting of shades of varying temperature, relative warmth, relative coolness. For example, can you not feel a subtle radiating warmth in the heart region? And perhaps this temperature feels like it's fluctuating, it's spreading, it's moving, it's changing. Perhaps you notice a little blush in the facial area. And the reason you notice that is because there's this detectable warmth. Maybe you are able to detect patches of coolness on your skin. And by the way, you don't have to really say anything to yourself, but if you really have to think something, if you really need to say something to yourself, make that speech help you anchor in the practice. So for example, breathing in, be aware of the body. Breathing out, be aware of the body, or simply be aware of the body. You could change this speech. You could pose this question, what's it like to have a body? The fire element. You could just recite this, the fire element. Temperature, warmth. Witness and experience and feel the temperature as it is changing, as it is happening. You're not dwelling on a concept. You're not dwelling on an idea. You're feeling, you're experiencing an ongoing phenomenon. And what about the water element? Wetness, moisture. And maybe you could feel it in the inside of your mouth. Maybe you could feel it, the blood coursing through the body. There's this liquidity. There's this water-like quality. Once again, don't make the focus on the idea of water. Feel your body. It could be that you're experiencing radiating sensations. They move like water. There are these tiny rivulets, tiny rivers coursing through different parts of your body. Electrical currents. Like they wiggle up and down, left and right. Maybe they're spreading like ripples of water. Maybe there are like bubbly sensations in your body. Your body feels like, a champagne bottle that's just been opened. This welling up of bubble-like sensations. And then there's a wind element, which is really a metaphorical way of saying motion. Motion. And even though you may be sitting still, relatively speaking, you may be laying, lie on the floor still, relatively speaking. At the very least, you're still able to detect motion of expansion that's associated with in-breaths, a motion of deflation that is associated with out-breath. Maybe you're able to detect a little tremor in the body. Maybe you're consciously adjusting your posture. You don't even have to open your eyes, by the way, to witness, right? To visually see the motion, but you feel it. You feel it. You know when your body is moving. Once again, you're kind of like the blind samurai, in this, Japanese martial art genre. Even though you're blind, you're not relying on your sight. You're not relying on using mental picture, or you're using the sense of touch, the tactile faculty, to develop affinity with the body. You don't have to hold any sort of preconceived notions about the body. Like, oh, this is ugly, this is beautiful, I'm tall, I'm short, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm neither. You don't even need to entertain those notions about the body. Make it very straightforward. Simplify it so that it's just about the experience of physical sensation. Once again, why are we doing this? This is so to help with step number 4. As you become more sensitive to the sensations of the body, you'll become more sensitive to the exertions, the subtle activities in the body, the way you engage the muscles, the way you put together this present posture. Spend a little time exploring the inside of the body, whatever that means to you. There's no absolute answer. You may even think, oh, how weird. How can I feel the inside of the body? Can I actually feel the interior wall of the body? Don't worry about that. Subjectively, whatever to you is inside, what does that feel like? Do you not hold the idea that you have inside? If so, where do you get that idea from? What are the sensations that you subjectively read as coming from inside? What about outside? You usually hold the idea that there's an outside to your body, right? So how do you know that? What sensations are giving you that subjective interpretation that there's this outside? Now, as you're doing this exploration, it's useful to sometimes come back and check the way you are using your attention. If you're staring very hard, trying to find some microscopic aspect of this experience, soften that, soften your gaze. Okay, you're not trying to turn yourself into a microscope. Soften your gaze. It doesn't help if you try to stare into something. The bodily experience is everywhere, it's anywhere. You could relax. You can lie into awareness, and still right there, the body would manifest. The bodily experience would manifest. Right? So you're not trying to stare at the nose tip. You're not trying to send your attention and lock it at where your navel is at. Right? You're not trying to do any of that. In fact, you could diffuse your attention. You don't have to train your attention on anything specific. You could just relax into your awareness and feel your body in such a way. You might notice that you are subtly cocking your eyes because you're used to paying attention in such a way. Whenever you're concentrating really hard, you implicitly cock your eyes. Right? If you notice that, let that go. Right? Uncock the eyes. Right? Soften the gaze. Soften your facial expressions. And then you can come back to exploring the body again. It's useful to sometimes just come back and remind yourself, relax, relax. It's useful to come back and remind yourself, be alert. You could be alert without straining yourself. You don't have to keep your eyes wide open to stay alert, right? You don't need to strain your brain and thinking about something really hard to stay alert. No. It helps use the vitaka of repeating some critical phrases to yourself, like whole body. Once again, this is primarily involving a range of activity. You're not training in concentrating. You're not training in single pointedness. You're developing a sort of situational awareness. Initially, this may involve varied activities, checking up on this, checking up on that, and modifying this, softening your gaze, reminding yourself to relax. Maybe you're exploring the temperature aspect of the body. Maybe you're experiencing the motion aspect of the body. Maybe you don't care for any of those ideas. You're just immersing in the body, asking yourself, what's it like to have a body? And we're bringing this practice session to an end. So please open your eyes if they were closed. And please come back to your initial posture wherein you're listening to the talk, to the class. Whenever you're ready, turn your camera back on. Okay, so any thoughts, any questions about this little exercise? By the hey, this is not the only way to do step number three. Okay, I'm giving you like a small sample. There are many ways for you to delve into the body, right? To understand the bodily experience, to understand what you are doing to the body, what your mind is doing to the body, how the mind is relating to the body, and so forth. There are many different ways. This is just a, small sample. But this week is also going to be the first week for you to be writing your weekly assignments. So don't forget, for this week, allocate a total of 1 hour to continue to play with this technique at your own leisure. You could do it in one single stretch, right? You could sit for an hour. If you're a more seasoned meditator, you could divide this up into segments, like 4 15-minute segment, right? You could divide this up into two 30-minute segment. And then you write, half a page about your experience, the way you implement this technique, or, what you find useful, what you find to be very frustrating, questions you may have, physical, mental phenomena that you noticed as you're going through this procedure. Okay. Any thoughts, any questions?
I have a question, Professor.
Yes, please, Albert.
Um, well, do you think that one can get enlightened by practicing with only their eyes closed? Because
Yeah, no, you
if
can. So with regards to whether you meditate with eyes closed or eyes open, treat that as a part of the adjusting of the physical posture. So you're playing with it, you're looking at the effect, right? There are people who goes, oh, every time I shut my eyes, I immediately go into a sleepy mode, right? And then there are also people who complain about, if I keep my eyes open, then my eyes are straining. They're teary, they're tired, to stay open and looking at the sights around me, I couldn't help but to be distracted by what's going on in the environment, right? So there could be um, ups and downs, right? Associated with either keeping the eyes open or shut, right? Some people take kind of like the moderate approach and keep their eyes half open, half shut. As play with them, and don't think, even if you arrived at something that you personally prefer, like, oh, I prefer to just sit with my eyes shut completely, right? Or I prefer to sit with my eyes half open. Don't take that to be the final end all be all, but rather treat it as, this is something I find useful at this time, you see. So think of meditation as this adjusting, evolving, changing, varying process. Eventually, you will arrive at a place where the sankharas are naturally pacified and you happily, comfortably settle into simplicity, right? It will feel like it could, your mind could become so quiet, in fact, to the extent where all thoughts disappear. There's no noticeable use of intention, and yet, there's this clear awareness in the background. Right? Any other thoughts, questions?
Professor, quick questions.
Please, yeah.
How to handle or deal with the feelings or sensation of the pleasant, unpleasant?
Okay. Yeah. So, usually in the suttas, when the Buddha talked about happiness and pleasure, he's really talking about something um, readily useful, like a sense of being inspired, a sense of body fullness, pleasure, and so forth. But on the other hand, the sort of pleasant, unpleasant sensations you're experiencing as you're working with step number three are likely to be relatively minor sensations, right? Somewhat pleasant, somewhat unpleasant, maybe mostly neutral, most likely that, right? So you could ignore them, right? You're just feeling them, you're just allowing them to rise and pass on their own. However, when these sensations become not mild anymore, let's say you're experiencing a lot of pain in your body. Okay, then you want to do something about it. Now, I understand that in many Buddhist traditions, it will ask you to sit through physical pain, to develop stamina in such a way, to develop equanimity in such a way. My recommendation is that at least at the stage, okay, change your posture when you have discomfort. Always make it a rule to make your body as comfortable as possible. Okay, so this way, your mind doesn't get scared off by the prospect of meditating. I understand that there are a lot of you who are very disciplined, right? You go, no, I don't mind the pain. I could sit with excruciating pain for 3 hours, right, with super concentration and so forth. That's all fine and dandy. But you have to understand that the mind is a very delicate thing. So there's a part of the mind that obeys your strong will, right? There's another part of the mind that's kind of like a child, and she would rebel. He or she would become afraid, right? So the Buddha is very interested in behavioral issues. How do we preserve our fragile intention to practice so that practice can become more like a marathon? It could be long term. It becomes sustainable. You have to do all these things. You have to create these conditions. You have to protect your intention so that you continue to be willing to meditate for a long time to come. And one way to do that is to, at least in the beginning, right, ensure that your body is comfortable. Don't think about, oh, I want to develop endurance, that. Maybe you could deal with those issues later on, further down the road. Initially, if laying down the sofa makes you very comfortable, practice meditation, oftentimes in that way. You maybe still want to experiment with other postures, but you can frequently do that, right? With the following exception, maybe you're living in a temple as a venerable, as a monastic. You don't want people to see you that way, right? You don't want to project an image, oh, I'm the super lazy meditator, like every time I meditate, I'm laying in the sofa and people will comment, right? So like a big part of the monastic code of discipline is to maintain communal harmony and people don't badmouth us, right? So if you want to take the informal approach, do so in private when people are not looking at you, when people are not judging you and so forth. And in my own case, yes, there are maybe some stretches in a day where I take up a formal posture, but the rest of the day, sometimes I lay down among the rocks, embrace the rocks, feeling the warmth radiating from the rocks. Or sometimes I, like kind of lay half like lay into my lounge chair and just kind of like with eyes half open, softly gazing at the blue sky, at the tree leaves. There are many things you can try. Yeah. Other thoughts, other questions?
Yeah, I have a question,
Yes,
Professor.
please.
Yeah, when we practice by ourselves, are there any guides or there some sentences we are speaking to ourselves to direct our
Yeah,
practice?
that's a good question. So, especially in first jhana, right? Or as we're approaching first jhana, one of the things we learn is called vitaka. And vitaka is internalized instruction, right? You're repeating what you learn. And a not so good way to use this internal instruction is if you merely recite it like a mantra. If you just sit there and just go breathing in, breathing out, be aware of whole body. You just keep repeating this mechanically in a robotic fashion. It's not very helpful, right? And you're kind of like believing that by saying this, because you're chanting the sutta, somehow you are creating good merit for yourself. And that doesn't really help with your meditation. But on the other hand, if whatever you choose to recite, to repeat to yourself, whatever short, pithy instruction you've memorized, that you could use while meditating is framing your practice, is guiding your practice, is helping you to steer your attention to the right sorts of activities. Then it's good, right? Now, eventually, of course, as we meditate, as we become better meditator, we're pacifying sankharas. We become less and less dependent on using internal voices to guide us. And so eventually vitakka would drop off. Okay. But initially, it may be helpful to recite a useful thing to yourself, such as, let me give you an example. Let's say you're a person who's very agitated, you're just habitually restless, right? So as you meditate and you do your main thing, right, being aware of the whole body, you're practicing step number 3, you say, relax, relax, right? You could say this at whatever rhythm you want. It could be a little faster, it could be slower. You can maybe repeat it once every 2 minutes, right? Really few and far between. That's fine too, right? Or you find another pithy instruction that is very helpful to your situation. For example, putting aside worries, I'll come back to my body, right? Maybe you're like the worrying sort. You're the type who worries a lot, right? So you keep repeating this to yourself, putting aside worries, coming back to the body, right? Still another example, another kind of recitation you could do. The breathing body. In other words, you're not just paying attention to the breath. You're not focusing on this narrow aspect. You're looking at the body as a breathing phenomenon. Your whole body is being inflated. Your whole body is being deflated. Your whole body is being moderated by the breath, is being energized by the breath, is being soothed by the breath. Just recite breathing body, right? The body is breathing, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering that we should when do the exercise by ourselves, we should keep in mind, or we should know in advance that we are practicing. For example, we are practicing the step 3, and then that means that we are practice observing our, be aware of our body, right?
Yeah, so that's really what mindfulness is about. I understand that nowadays in popular circles, mindfulness is defined as non-judgmental acceptance of the present moment, right? But in the context of the early suttas, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is remembrance. Is remembrance. So if you are able to remember your purpose, like what you're doing right now, right? How to do this, right? You keep this in mind. You keep bringing your attention back to this present purpose. That's called being mindful. So in the same way, when you're driving, right? Being mindful doesn't mean that, oh, you keep watch over your breath. Being mindfully driving means you remember you're driving right now, or you remember how to drive skillfully, or you remember to watch the speed limit, to check up on your distance between you and the other cars, presence, absence of pedestrians, the way you use your physical posture, so on and so forth. That's called being mindful. In the same way, when you're practicing this technique, step number 3, and you remember, oh, I am doing step number 3. I'm doing this, right? Every time your mind wanders off, maybe your mind is like, yeah, yesterday I already had curry. Should I cook curry again for dinner? Right? And you go, oh, wait, I am, like being distracted, right? I'm deviating from my main topic, from my purpose at hand, and you bring it back. You remember what you're doing right here, and you remember how to do it properly. You keep all these things in mind. This is called remembrance. It's called,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so that's I'm just trying that when imagine when I'm doing by myself, that yeah, I know my purpose, and then I will just practice, right? And how could I achieve the that I'm trying to be aware of my bodies, and that depends, right?
Okay, so there's no one absolute correct way to do step number
Yeah.
3. but you are learning to create the proper conditions for you to successfully carry out this task, right? What are the helpful conditions you can help set up? You're exploring, right? Maybe I need to sit a certain way. Maybe I need to remind myself to relax. Maybe I need to put aside worrying thoughts, right? Maybe I need to remember, oh, it's not about imagination. It's about feeling sensation,
Yeah.
right? Maybe it's about creating all these things, and you are exploring for yourself what sort of ingredients you need to include, what sort of
Yeah.
ingredients you have to exclude to make this task good, successfully being carried out by you, right? And um, the more you do this, the more you will understand why you're doing this, and the more you will be able to carry out this task with precision. A lot of people, they just go, okay, I just want to stay in the body to, I don't know, run away from reality, right?
Okay.
But as your mindfulness becomes stronger, right, and your understanding of the Dharma becomes more precise,
Yeah.
then know how exactly is awareness of the body going to serve you in pacifying sankharas, which is your next step, which is really the main step, the most important step in the body satipatthana. Then
Mm.
so in other words, you're not practicing step number three in a nilly-willy way, in a completely arbitrary way, in a free-floating way. No, you're practicing in a way so that step number three can link up with step number four. You see?
Okay. Okay. I mean that in my opinion, I think that the be aware of the body is some kind of the result that I can be aware of my body. Um, so the means of doing it that should be or that might be feel my body. Is that all
Okay.
sense
It could be the result, or it could be the means. It could be
the
the ends.
means
It could be the means. You see?
means
So you could deliberately try to be aware of the body, right? Alternative, and um, it could also be that as a result of your having fostered all these conducive conditions, your mind becomes more aware of the body. It could be
okay.
both, right? It could be both. So it could be that because you're fostering all the right conditions, you're creating the right kind of internal and external environment, so your mind
Okay.
becomes better at becoming aware of the body, becomes more sensitive about the body, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
you could just directly tackle it. You could, okay, this is the thing I'm training on. I'm trying
yeah,
to be aware of the
yeah,
body. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking that maybe just observe my body or about feel uh the reactions of my body
So
or things like that.
you could try to
Yeah.
just observe, right? To see if you could like try not to intervene at all, right? Try to be as pure of an observer as you can. That's one approach to relating to the body. Okay. And or you could experiment with what we suggested, like the breath, like somewhere in between what is conscious and what is unconscious, what is intentional and what is unintentional.
Oh
So
yeah.
maybe you're subtly introducing this intention of relaxing the body, subtly introducing the intention of feeding the body, settling into the body. In other words, you're doing something, right? And maybe you're tweaking the body. Maybe you're adjusting a little bit the way the breaths spread, the way the breaths suffuse, the way the breath um, um, nourish the whole body, and so forth. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Eventually, as when the conditions are ripe, the sankharas will naturally drop off. They will naturally become pacified. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Then might be
Please keep in mind, when we say gradual pacification of sankhara, that it is the goal of the practice. It doesn't mean that, oh, okay, So the goal of Buddhist meditation is to pacify all sankhara. Let me just stop doing anything. Let me just stop doing anything, right? Let me just pause. Let me just become frozen. Let me just enter into a frozen state, right? When you do that, you're doing something. When you go, I'm trying to stop, right?
Yeah.
All my thoughts. When I try to drop all my perception, try to not do this, not to do that. You're actually doing something. In fact,
Yeah.
you're doing something even more forcefully than you
Yeah.
normally would. You see. So the way to really pacify sankharas is not through force, is not through control. Force and control, they're last resource. I'm not saying you absolutely cannot use them, right? You could still use them, but they're not the best approach. What Buddhist meditation is about is it creates the conducive conditions, and then your mind will naturally take a rest. Okay. For example, as you come to see more and more clearly the nature of intention, your mind will naturally be more and more willing to surrender intention. As you become more relaxed, your mind will naturally become more settled into simplicity. It will naturally be able to find a pleasure that is close. It doesn't have to travel out there to, you know, perform sensual pursuit, to engage in sensual craving. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I think that's it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
For today, unless you have other pressing questions, please once again be reminded to write maybe half a page if you'd like to write a page of weekly report. It would be very good if you could submit it before the end of the week. You could just send it to my email. Okay. All right. Take care,
So
people. Yes,
thank you.
Uh,
Thank you. Goodbye.
and
you have a question?
so yes, yes. So the weekly log is like I have to write whole weekly practice in one or daily practices log differently.
Okay. You only have to turn in like a half a page thing.
Okay.
Okay. So
And
however way you want to
uh,
do that, yeah. Ideally, you do it right after your practice session, so while the memory is still fresh. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
so we only have learned the 1, 2, 3 steps. So we have to practice those
Right. You could
steps
choose
to
to write on 1, 2, 3. You could choose to just write on 3. Yeah. You
oh,
choose to write on one,
okay.
two.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we email it to your US email?
Yes. Yes, please.
Okay.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Take care,
you.
people. Bye-bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.